Hello again to all of our Fusion City Church Connect groups. I hope that you guys are having an awesome week and that you've had a good amount of time to prepare for group this week. I hope that you've already had a great meal together and that you're prepared now to talk through the stuff that we read together this last week. So if you haven't already, I really want you guys to spend some time, either just sometime before you leave tonight, after the discussion this evening, before you guys break away, to talk about your service project for this session of Connect Groups. We think that's an important part of why we do Connect Groups and an important element of every group. So make sure that you're spending some time talking through your community service project, that you've got a good plan for that. Go ahead and put some of the details in place this week. In the book this week, we read together through chapters 7 through 11. Those were all about some specific types of relationships that we have in our lives with our friends, with our family, with our spouse, with our children if we're parents, or if we're children of parents. That's all of us, right? How we interact with other people, that it's important for us to have a system to work through, to have some boundaries in place for those types of relationships. And so I'm going to ask now that in just a few seconds that you'll pause the video and go around the room and just share with each other some of your takeaways from chapters 7 through 11. Anything that you highlighted, any notes you made in the margin, anything that really struck you in a way or that was profound, something that you felt like you learned this week. If you would, just take a few minutes and share with the rest of your group some of your thoughts from this week's content, and then I'll come back after you guys have had an opportunity to share and give you some of my thoughts and my takeaways from chapters 7 through 11. Go ahead and pause the video now. Great. I hope that you had a lot of opportunity and a lot of great thoughts to come out of your discussion as you guys talked. And again, just wanted to share with you some of the things that I took away. I thought there were some recurring themes this week in a lot of the very practical tools that Townsend and Cloud gave us as they wrote. And so I just wanted to point out a few of those. I don't know if it's true for you, but for me, I've seen friends or family or associates, whatever. I've seen a lot of instances in my life of like some failure to launch, right? Like adults that just never really seemed to get off of mom and dad's, system or whatever. They've failure to launch, failure to become adults on their own. I've seen a lot of people lean too heavily, in my opinion, on the bank of mom and dad, and they've never been able to really sustain themselves financially on their own. And I've even seen some parents that try to live vicariously through their teenage and adult children. And in all of those types of relationships, it's important for us to have boundaries, because if we don't, then we end up in this situation as adults where we have an unhealthy balance between ourselves and what the authors call our family of origin. I thought they did a nice job pointing out some of those things. They said this on page 134. They said, when we become part of God's family, obeying His ways will sometimes cause conflict in our families and sometimes separate us. Jesus says that our spiritual ties are the closest and most important. And he says that in Matthew chapter 12, verses 46 through 50. And then a little further down on page 134, they asked this question. They said, have we really become an adult in relation to our family of origin? I think that's an important question for all of us to answer. And so maybe you can look at your life and think, yeah, like I've done a pretty good job of separating myself from mom and dad or from my family of origin, or maybe you begin to evaluate and think some things like, I've got some work to do. Maybe I'm a little too dependent on my past relationships, my family of origin, maybe a little bit too dependent there. And then the authors gave us what I thought was a really helpful practical tool. They called it the boundaries checklist. And they gave us these things through pages 134 through 137. They said that when we have boundary problems with our family, that we should identify the symptom, identify the conflict, identify the need that drives the conflict, take in and receive the good. We should practice boundary skills. We got to learn to say no to the bad. Forgiveness is a big part of that, as we forgive the aggressor. responding and not reacting, and learning to live in the freedom and responsibility instead of living in guilt. And then all throughout the rest of the chapters, they gave us these different scenarios about relationships with parents, relationships with kids, relationships with spouses, relationships with friends, where we get to walk through kind of this 8-step process of working through boundary conflicts. And here's what I thought was interesting about every one of those scenarios. In every single one of them, there was a common response to the conflict. And that was that we are to have some communication with. We're to confront. We're to make our position and our conflict known to the other person. Communication is such a key element to healthy relationships. It's the only way that we can maintain boundaries. It's the only way that we can have healthy relationships with other people. The authors gave us on page 130 a list of scriptures that speak to this, and they hit Old Testament and New Testament. Proverbs chapter 28 verse 23 says, "Whoever rebukes a person will in the end gain favor rather than the one who has a flattering tongue." So again, confrontation there produces a benefit because we have a healthy relationship. Leviticus 19:17, "Do not hate a fellow Israelite in your heart. Rebuke your neighbor frankly so you will not share in their guilt." In Matthew chapter 5, now over in the New Testament, says that if we're at the altar, if we find ourselves at the altar ready to offer a sacrifice and we've got a conflict with somebody else, that we should go and work that out with them before we leave our gift. And then Matthew 18:15, a very common verse in dealing with conflict between people, particularly conflict between other believers. "If your brother or sister sins, go and point out their fault just between the two of you." Healthy relationships have to have conversation between the two involved parties. And then what the authors did here, they pointed out this thing that I never heard the term, thought it was really interesting for me, is triangulation. Almost the misery loves company. Every time we have a conflict with someone, the tendency I think for a lot of us is probably to go and find somebody else to support my position, right? Instead of dealing with the individual one-on-one or face-to-face, I go and find somebody else to plead my case to, and then I get support from them. I've brought in a third person that wasn't involved in the conflict and doesn't necessarily need to be part of it. Now, getting wise counsel and getting advice from other people, sure, that's all well and good, and we should do those types of things. But if we're just pleading our case to somebody else when we should be having the conversation with the offending party, then we're out of line, out of balance, and we're missing the boundaries that we need in our lives. Another thing, one more thing from me, and then I'll let you guys get back to your conversations. I found a lot of help in the section on how we communicate with our spouses. It was in the section on spouses, but I felt like this was a really overarching principle that we should apply to the whole of our lives. That instead of expecting the other person to change, we should learn to expect of ourselves to enact the boundaries that we've put in place. And again, in the section on boundaries in marriage, the authors were talking about, they gave us this scenario between Bob and I don't remember his wife's name. It doesn't matter. But it says that Bob wanted his wife to stop wanting instead of his learning to say no. That was on page 157. I think that's a really, really, really important principle and something that I've got to work on personally, and maybe that's true for a lot of you as well. Instead of expecting the other person to change their behavior, I've just got to learn to be more firm with setting the boundaries that I have. So instead of expecting them to stop wanting me to do something, I should expect of myself to have the fortitude to say no when I really mean no. Those were just really helpful takeaways for me this week. I thought the scriptures on how we should communicate to one another were really profound. I thought that expecting myself to stick to my boundaries is the better expectation than expecting somebody else to change. Those were my big takeaways for the week as I read through chapters 7 through 11. I hope that you had some great takeaways as well. Spend some more time tonight talking in your groups about the conversation. Maybe something I said could spark some additional conversations with you as well. Go ahead and get a plan together for food next week, and then head your separate ways this week. Pray together, spend some time doing that as well. I hope that you, if you haven't already, make sure that we're praying together. That's a big part of our groups as well. But anyway, hope that you're enjoying the book. I know that I am. You guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you Sunday morning.